comic book films. They are the biggest thing in Hollywood right now. Whether they are from Marvel or DC, they have dominated the box office with very successful films with some crappy ones. Most of them have brought comic book characters we've been wanting to see in live action to life and finally doing it. Like, even for me, I used to wonder if we ever got a Doctor Strange movie or a Moon Knight movie, and we got a TV show instead. And I used to wonder if they would decide to have Spider-Man be a part of the Avengers. And for this top 15 video, yes, top 15 because it was too tough for me to just make it a top 10, I am going to be talking about my favorite superhero films. Some of them are from Marvel, some of them are from DC, some of them are from a different company, and some of them aren't even based off of a comic book. Also, just as a heads up, these are just my picks for the top 15 video, and if any of your favorites aren't on this list, then I apologize. These are just my picks. So grab some popcorn, grab some soda, or any other types of food and beverages you enjoy, sit back, relax, and enjoy my top 15 favorite superhero films. Starting off with a few honorable mentions. These are movies that I do love, but unfortunately didn't make it on this list, and if they did, then this would be a top 20 video, and this video would probably be 40 minutes long. Men in Black. Blade 2, a really fun action film with incredible practical effects and makeup. Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, both really fun MCU films that are well directed and with really good scores by Alan Silvestri. Wonder Woman, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, a movie with incredible animation, great characters, and a very heartfelt story. Thor Ragnarok, a very funny movie with very colorful visuals, and in my opinion, the best Thor film in the MCU. The Crow, Kick-Ass, The Batman, Spider-Man 2002, a great origin story with an awesome villain in Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, and V for Vendetta. Do you see how long this list would have been if I kept most of those films on it? Starting off with number 15 with Blade, an awesome vampire movie with great action sequences with a really good stunt team. A world that's set up very well with how vampires try to hide in the daytime and operate while sending in humans as familiars to find more people for them to feed on while also running nightclubs. And an awesome performance from Wesley Snipes as Blade. I can't imagine anyone else playing the character besides him. He was that awesome. I mean, I love Mahershala Ali as an actor, and I'm looking forward to seeing him as Blade in the MCU, and he has big shoes to fill because Wesley Snipes' Blade is iconic. Number 14 is Superman from 1978. This movie, in my opinion, is the one where they got Superman right. They made an origin story that does get you to care about Clark Kent, played excellently by Christopher Reeve, who is another casting choice that I can't imagine anyone else playing the character besides him. It has a very iconic score by John Williams, and even though most of the green screen is dated, they were still able to make it convincing with how they were able to move Christopher Reeve's body to make it look like he's actually flying. This is also a very important movie to talk about because if this movie never got made, then we probably wouldn't be getting any comic book films we get today. Number 13 is Marvel's The Avengers, a movie that Marvel was setting up with their first few films, and one of them I am gonna mention pretty soon. Most of Marvel's films in Phase 1 were pretty good, but not great. Like, I do enjoy the first Thor film and the first Captain America film, but they weren't amazing films like this one. This one had great characters and really good dialogue. It has perfect casting choices like Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, and Chris Evans as Captain America, and a great villain like Loki. And of course, the Hulk is a badass. Coming in at number 12 is Guardians of the Galaxy. This one is based off a comic book run that not a lot of people knew about back then because the Guardians of the Galaxy weren't very well known back then, like people were more known to heroes like Spider-Man or the X-Men. But then James Gunn comes in and makes the Guardians of the Galaxy a big name for the MCU. It's a very funny movie and it's very character driven that gets you to care about Star-Lord and Gamora Gamora and Rocket Raccoon. You even get to care about a talking tree that walks and only says one phrase. The humor still lands for me, it's still very funny to watch, and the soundtrack is still very catchy, and I do like to listen to it sometimes. Number 11 is Logan, Hugh Jackman's final film as Wolverine. Or so we thought. This movie took a character that we all know is not always family friendly. It gives it a Western feel, makes it rated R, and makes it very bloody and brutal, and gives it a very touching story that made me care about Logan as a character. And even though they are bringing Hugh Jackman back for Deadpool 3, which they also mentioned that it's going to take place before Logan, I still think Logan is a very satisfying conclusion for the Wolverine character. Coming in at number 10 is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, another comic book run that's not very well known to most people, but still got an awesome movie. It has a likable main lead that has a backstory that makes you sympathize for him. It also has a great villain that also has a backstory that makes you sympathize for him even more. The humor didn't overstay its welcome, it had the right balance, and it has beautifully shot action sequences that are well choreographed and well shot, and in my opinion are the highlights of the film. Number 9 is X2, X-Men United. This movie has well-developed characters that get you to understand and care about what's going on, and it takes itself very seriously. The stunt work and the action sequences are very well done and sometimes painful, whether it's the White House fight scene with Nightcrawler fighting a bunch of security guards or Wolverine killing a bunch of soldiers in the X-Mansion. This one also had perfect casting choices like Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier, Ian McKellen as Magneto, and of course Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. It is a great sequel to the first X-Men film, and in my opinion it's actually a little bit better than that film. Coming in at number 8 is a movie that stars Robert Downey Jr. This movie is the one that made him finally get off of drugs, because before this film he had to deal with a drug problem for a few years that kind of ruined his career. But after he got cast as this certain character, it finally got him off of drugs and made him very healthy. And what I'm talking about is Iron Man. This movie does a really good job at making a down-to-earth story about a rich billionaire playboy philanthropist turning into an armored superhero that wants to help people, and it does make you care about Tony Stark quite a bit. And Robert Downey Jr. is excellent in this film, and I can't imagine anyone else playing the character besides him. And that's of course another casting choice I have the same feeling for. This movie has very compelling characters, really good action sequences that are very intense, and CGI that surprisingly still holds up even to this day. This is, in my opinion, a great start to the MCU, and it's slightly underrated because when you compare it to movies like Guardians of the Galaxy or the first Avengers film, they would look at Iron Man and say, that's fine, but they have to realize that this movie changed the game. This movie is the reason we have the Avengers now. If this movie didn't get made, then we wouldn't have an MCU right now, or maybe an Avengers film right now. Coming in at number 7 is Deadpool. Now this is a character that's been played by Ryan Reynolds and done in live action before, but we don't talk about that one. And this movie was able to take the issues that they did with Deadpool in X-Men Origins Wolverine and pokes fun at both them and some of these superhero tropes in the superhero genre. Ryan Reynolds is great as the character, and the humor and the fourth wall jokes were hilarious from beginning to end. Number 6 is The Incredibles, the first animated film on this list, and the first one on this list to not be based off of a comic book. It has compelling characters with problems that make them feel like people in a world where it's illegal for them to be superheroes. It has good animation, a great villain that has a good backstory to get you to understand where he's coming from, and in my opinion, it's one of the best Pixar films of all time. Number 4 is Spider-Man 2. I have been a huge fan of Spider-Man ever since I was a little kid. I used to watch the animated shows, I used to collect the toys, I used to play some of the video games when I was little, and of course watch the original Sam Raimi trilogy so many times. It's not only my favorite Spider-Man film in the Raimi trilogy, but it is also my favorite Spider-Man film in general. I do love Into the Spider-Verse, and I do enjoy the Tom Holland Spider-Man films like No Way Home, and I of course love the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man film, but this film in particular, this one is my favorite. And the reason it's my favorite is because it's the one that made me care about Peter Parker as a character. You do start to sympathize for him throughout the film, whether he's trying to balance two lives by being Spider-Man and saving New York City from criminals, while also trying to be Peter Parker and having a normal life and trying to be there for his friends, family, and his college. And that becomes a big struggle for him, and this movie does it really well here. It has a very sympathetic villain like Dr. Octopus, played by Alfred Molina. You understand where he's coming from. He is a threatening villain, and Alfred Molina is fantastic in the film. The action sequences are still gripping and intense, even to this day, like the famous train scene. That one still holds up really well, with some of the CGI looking a little dated, but besides that, that train scene is still very awesome to watch. And this film and this entire trilogy in general pays homage to the classic Stan Lee and Steve Ditko comics from the 50s and 60s very well. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because when people look at the Raimi trilogy, they're gonna think, oh, that's too cheesy, that's not for me. I'm more of a fan of the serious Spider-Man films, which I do get, but calling the Raimi trilogy cheesy isn't really a bad thing, because when you look at the original comics from the 50s and 60s, they are very cheesy, and that's what these films were trying to pay homage to. Number 4 is Batman Mask of the Phantasm. This movie wasn't very well known when it first came out, because it came out in a time when people were still talking about the 2 Tim Burton Batman films and the 2 Joel Schumacher films. But thanks to the internet, people are talking about Mask of the Phantasm more now, and they consider that to be one of the best Batman films of all time, like on par with the first Tim Burton Batman film, The Dark Knight, and The Batman. In case if you don't know what this movie's about, it is about a new vigilante called the Phantasm that's been killing certain mob bosses in Gotham City, and frames Batman for doing it, because Batman doesn't kill criminals, he just takes them down, and he has to find him and figure out who the Phantasm is. It has a very dark and interesting story that does get you invested from beginning to end, and it doesn't play it safe. It has some pretty dark deaths and imagery that could give some kids some nightmares. It has some great voice acting from Mark Hamill as the Joker. Yes, he's in this movie. It's not a spoiler, don't worry. And of course, the great Kevin Conroy as Batman. May he rest in peace. If you haven't seen Mask of the Phantasm, I strongly recommend you to watch this film on HBO Max. If you have HBO Max, then you can watch it there. Coming in at number 3 is Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Now this one was kind of obvious, because this is a very popular MCU film, and for good reason, because it develops the character of Captain America very well in this modern day realistic world that he's not used to being around. It's a spy thriller that's very intense. It has a terrifying villain in the Winter Soldier himself. It has very fast, gripping, and hyper-realistic action sequences. It takes itself very seriously, unlike most MCU films, and it's just an awesome movie. What else do I have to say about this movie that hasn't been said? It's definitely worth your time if you ever watch this film. Number 2 is Unbreakable, another superhero film on this list that's not based off of a comic book, but this film does relate to comic books in general. It's a very serious and down-to-earth story about a guy, played by Bruce Willis, who becomes the only survivor of a train crash, and Samuel L. Jackson suspects of him being a superhero. So really, this is about a guy who doesn't know that he's a superhero. It has great acting from both Willis and Jackson, beautiful cinematography with a lot of long takes, and a really good story that gets you to want to learn more about where Bruce Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson are coming from in this movie. It's very grounded and very realistic, and in my opinion, it's M. Night Shyamalan's best film. And when you really think about it, it's really what if Superman doesn't really know that he's Superman? Alright, number one. Now, number one is kind of a cheat because it's not one movie, it's 3 films in the whole trilogy, and I had to do this because I just couldn't separate them throughout this list. And what I'm talking about is the Dark Knight trilogy. Batman Begins is, once again, another great origin story that develops the character Bruce Wayne very well to becoming Batman. It has very well developed characters that get you to understand where they're coming from, great acting, an awesome score by both Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, and this is the one that brought Batman back on top because his career went downhill after Batman and Robin came out. Of course, we all know that The Dark Knight is a masterpiece. It has an engaging plot, really good action sequences, sympathetic characters that get you to care about what's going on, another great score from both Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard, and of course, an iconic performance from Heath Ledger as the Joker. May he rest in peace. And The Dark Knight Rises, for me, is a very satisfying conclusion to the trilogy. It shows Bruce Wayne as a broken character after the events of The Dark Knight, and it shows him trying to be Batman again after Bane comes to Gotham City and wreaks havoc and becomes the biggest challenge of his life. Yes, people have mentioned some issues with the film's ending and how everything turns out without giving anything away, but it's one of those moments where I just don't care because I'm more invested in the story and the characters, and I'm still engaged through the entire thing, and I was interested in Bruce's journey throughout both this film and the entire trilogy in general that made me overlook those flaws. And that's why the Dark Knight trilogy takes the number 1 spot on this list. And there you have it, folks, my top 15 favorite superhero films. If there are any you don't agree with me on, then that's alright, we all have opinions, but if you do agree with me on certain films on this list, then cool. Also, let me know what your top 10 favorite superhero films are in the comments below. And as always, if you like this review, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.